Why, hello, folks. We'd like to welcome you to the Missouri Department of Conservation's Wild Webcast on winter wildlife survival. So today we are going to be talking about some strange but true facts on winter wildlife survival. And if you're wondering who we are, I am Joe Jarrett, your Wild Webcast host, and we'd like to invite, who's already here, and thank Sarah Easton, she is a naturalist at Runge Nature Center here in Jeff City. So thank you and welcome, Sarah. Tell us a little about your background.
Thanks, Joe. I'm happy to be here, excited to be here this morning. Like you said, my name is Sarah. I'm a naturalist at Runge here in Jeff City. I am from the mid-Missouri area, so I've been here for most of my life, although I've jumped around a little bit. I've been with the department for about 2 years. Prior to that, I had various jobs, one of them being at the St. Louis Zoo, which was very fun.
Cool.
But I have a bachelor's in forestry and a master's in agriculture education, and somehow kind of ended up in this crazy field, but I wouldn't change it for the world.
Right, it is a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
And it's fascinating too, such as today. We're going to look at some strange ways that animals survive the winter with the help of our Strange But True new book. So Strange But True really was adapted from our amazing and award-winning kids magazine called Xplor, where we would feature these facts in each issue. Well, we compiled them into a 136-page full-color book that offers more than 350 fun facts about Missouri wildlife at its strangest. And since we are in the holiday season, we also have Strange But True as a great holiday gift. It's only $8.95, and you can buy the book online through our online nature shop at mdcnatureshop.com, or you could visit one of our numerous MDC Nature Centers around the state. So if you're looking for a stocking stuffer or other holiday gift, consider Strange But True. So we'll be using that information. We'll also be building on that information from our online field guide. So if you want to find plenty of information about native plants and animals, visit us online to search our field guide. Again, that's at mdc.mo.gov/discover-nature/field-guide. And if you have any questions for us throughout this conversation, please share them through the chat box on the right side of our screen. So before we
get started, I wanted to kind of lay some context for what we're going to be talking about today. Of course, that Strange But True book has tons of facts in it about lots of different cool plants and animals in Missouri, but we did narrow that down a little bit to winter survival. And I wanted to talk about winter because we're in winter and it's relevant to what we're doing right now, but I wanted to change our perspective on winter a little bit. So when we think about winter, I wanted to highlight why it's so hard for animals, right? With, the exception of maybe your cat or your dog or your pet bird that you have at home, animals don't have the option to go inside and get warm like we do. So when we think about winter, a lot of times we think about animals out in the cold. And that, of course, is a problem for animals. They can't get too cold. But actually, winter is hard to survive for a little bit deeper reason. And if you know anything about food chains or how our ecosystems work, this might sound familiar. But the foundation of our ecosystems or our food chains, after the sun, of course, are our plants or our producers. And what happens, Joe, to most of our plants in Missouri in the winter?
Well, right, except for this really bizarre winter we're having now where I think it's 50 degrees outside.
That's true.
Right, most of the winter plants die. They go dormant. There may be seeds, nuts, some food, but it's really hard for animals that eat plants to be out and about because there's really not a lot of plants to eat.
Right, those plants where we live here in Missouri are dormant in the winter, and that being such a major food source and the foundation for a lot of our food chains is really what makes it hard to survive as an animal. So we think about the cold temperatures a lot of times, but a lot of these animals can survive pretty cold, harsh conditions as long as they have enough food. And that's part of the harder part about winter. So if you are an animal and you're facing winter, days are starting to get shorter, what do you do? What are your options? Animals have a couple options. The first of those being that they can run away, right?
Leave, migrate.
Head somewhere a lot warmer than here. And those would be our migrators. We are not going to focus too much on those today because we're talking about those animals that kind of stick it out in winter. So the options we are going to focus on are the second one, which would be to sleep through the whole thing, right? And those are our hibernators. And the third option they have, which we'll get to here in a minute, are animals that remain active, and they have some special adaptations that allow them to do that. But we'll start with our hibernators.
Right, so we're going to jump in and go through some quick lists. So one of our noted hibernators is the woodchuck, also known as a groundhog. Some people call him a whistle pig. A lot of names, but this is a native animal. And while hibernating, a woodchuck breathes once every 4 minutes, and its heart beats only 5 times a minute. That is really slow. The slow down state, woodchucks survive without eating or drinking for over 3 months. That's kind of amazing. And again, Sarah, tell us a bit more. They are a true hibernator. What's kind of the difference?
Yeah, so this is a great example of a hibernator in Missouri, and a pretty common one that we think of when we think of hibernating animals, probably in part because of Groundhog Day, right? But they do sleep through the whole winter, or hibernate through the whole winter. And a couple key characteristics of true hibernation that we can see in that fact are the slow heart rate and the slow breathing. They also have a slower metabolism. So just to put that in perspective, their normal heart rate is about 110 beats a minute, and it drops down to about 5.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty slow. So they're one of the only large mammals in Missouri that are kind of active during the day. So a lot of times animals are out at night or dusk and dawn. Woodchucks are active all day. You could see them often even on the sides of roads, kind of standing up as they do. I didn't realize this until I started working for conservation, that woodchucks can also climb trees.
Yeah, they're climbing trees primarily to look for food. They are pretty much vegetarians, so they're looking for grasses and other kind of clover, alfalfa, things like that to eat. But they will climb trees for apples and pawpaws especially. And they will be looking for all that extra food in the fall as they're kind of fattening up for that long winter's nap.
Fattening up for winter is some of us humans also do, including me. And we can see that they're scattered pretty much throughout the whole state. And again, if you want more information on these animals, check out our online field guide, which has some more kind of scientific information there too. So another one of Missouri's true hibernators is the 13-lined ground squirrel. So with the 13-line ground squirrel, they spend more than half of their lives hibernating. Talk about sleeping a lot. These drowsy squirrels, they'll crawl into their burrows in October. They will truly hibernate, falling deeply asleep, and they don't wake up until April. 6 months. How does an animal's metabolism? I mean, how do you even survive that long?
Yeah, I love this example because it's a great example of a true hibernator, and I consider it a true icon. I wish I could
6
sleep
months
that
of
much.
sleeping, I know, right?
But yeah, just like our groundhog, they're entering that true hibernation, so they have that low heart rate, the low breathing. Their heart rate for a 13-line ground squirrel during hibernation is estimated to be about 3 to 10 beats per minute, where their normal heart rate might be over 200 beats per minute.
Wow.
So they dramatically change their body when they're in that hibernation state. And they have a kind of cool pattern you can see a little bit on that illustration, but more so on this next slide here, which really gives them their name, that 13-line ground squirrel. They are related to our other squirrel members here in the state that you might be more familiar with, but they look similar to a chipmunk, but they have many more lines.
Right, they're kind of the same size, and they too, they live in grasslands and all of that. Speaking of other similar rodents, squirrels and chipmunks. We see squirrel nests up in the trees and things, so they sleep through the winter, but they're not true hibernators.
Oh, you're jumping ahead of me, Joe.
Sorry.
Hold on to your enthusiasm.
Okay.
We'll get there.
All right, so we'll get back to that. Another kind of cute to a lot of people hibernator is the Indiana Myotis, or which is a fancy word for bat. So it's the Indiana bat. So over a third of all Indiana bats in the world spend their winters hibernating in Missouri caves. So during this deep sleep, these little critters can crowd together on cave walls, hanging upside down, as many as 500 bats per square foot. Now, these things are tiny, but 500 in a square foot. They do that for warmth, I would think.
Yeah, so they have a little bit different adaptation to hibernation, and that's that they huddle together to keep them warm. They're still hibernating like our other animals we've mentioned so far, but they hibernate together in those clusters. And like you said, they are pretty tiny. They're about 2 inches, so very small animals. Makes sense that you would need all the help you could get from all your friends to stay warm.
Right.
And you mentioned that they hibernate in a few caves, which I think is just amazing. They have very specific conditions that they need when hibernating, specific temperature and humidity. So out of all the caves in Missouri, which, we are the cave state.
And we have like more than 6,000 caves throughout the state. Yes.
There's been about 27 caves that have been identified that meet those specific conditions that they can hibernate in.
Interesting enough, these caves where they hibernate, they're called hibernaculars. So that's another kind of fancy word. A hibernacular is basically a cave where bats hibernate. Now, we've mentioned too on here that they are an endangered species, both federally and statewide. They're also a species of conservation concern. So these caves where they hibernate, folks, if you're interested in seeing them, we'll tell you now, don't, because all the public caves are closed off. They are, again, a species that's been listed as endangered, so we don't want to disturb them while they're hibernating during the winter or even during other months. So it's best to see them through pictures. But again, 500 of these little critters per square foot. That is amazing. So these are true hibernators. And again, a true hibernation involves what, 3 things?
Do you remember, Joe?
I think I do. It's the lowering of body temperature.
Yep.
It's the lowering of what, your heart rate,
yep,
your metabolism.
Yeah.
And it's sleeping deeply.
Well, your breaths per minute, your heart rate, and a lower body temperature and slower metabolism.
Okay, so one of literally the largest animals in the state, which people always associate with hibernating, aren't true hibernators. Let's look at that. Again, it's the American black bear. Most people think that, oh, this is the classic iconic hibernator. Well, during winter, the American black bears can sleep for about 100 days without eating, drinking, peeing, or pooping. But one of the first things they do when they wake up is go to the bathroom, like a lot of people, right?
I probably would too.
Exactly, after 100 days of not. So again, these aren't real hibernators. What are they then?
Yes,
what do they do?
So we think about the black bear, and a lot of people think, oh, the bears hibernate. That's a little bit of a trick question because not all hibernation is created equal. Bears actually enter what we call torpor, Torpor, torpor. So it's I equate it to kind of hibernation light. It's has the same characteristics and principles of hibernation, but it's usually not for as long and it's not as deep of a sleep. They can wake up periodically through the winter and move about, but they're not sleeping consistently through the winter like those animals we saw there at the beginning, and their body temperature does not drop as low. Now it's all relative because still 100 days of sleep seems like a lot to us.
But it's not 6 months like the ground squirrel.
Absolutely.
And a lot of folks also think when bears hibernate, which they don't, they go into that period of torpor, but it's going to be deep in some cave. And a lot of bears, most bears don't even really go to caves.
Yeah. And I always like to point that out with our black bear because, of course, we do have that black bear here in Missouri, kind of in the southern part of the state. People think, oh, a bear is found in a cave. For our black bears here in Missouri, that's not necessarily true. They, of course, could use a cave if one is available, but they also might be in a hollow tree. They might be in a big brush pile. They might just be kind of under a hanging rock.
Right, like the one picture we have, that bear is sleeping. It's not really in a cave. It's just between a couple of large rocks.
Yeah.
So black bears, again, folks, they're not true hibernators. They go into a state called torpor. Pretty fascinating. On the other end of that spectrum, one of the cutest but smallest animals we have in the state is the southern flying squirrel. Now, when the weather turns cold, southern flying squirrels, they really snuggle together inside hollow trees. They're really tiny, but their bodies could warm the den by up to 30 degrees or more. Now, one of the largest numbers of squirrels recorded is 50 squirrels have been found together packed into a single tree. So they really combine all their body temperatures and come together. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so they're using a couple different techniques to stay warm that we've seen so far. They're in that torpor state, so they're kind of decreasing their activity, which helps them stay warm. But then they're also using that technique of cuddling with all their 50 of their closest friends, right? But that group size does help increase the body heat. But they are, again, another torpor animal. They're not sleeping through the whole winter.
Right. We have a question from Bill who was asking, well, actually, he said, I never knew we had flying squirrels in the state. And a lot of people think that.
They do look a little bit like kind of an exotic animal. And that partly has to do with the fact that we don't see them out because they are nocturnal. So I always think it's a treat when you do get to see one. But they occupy the same, space and habitat as their non-flying diurnal daytime cousins, the other
squirrels.
types of squirrels, but they are just out at night, so we don't see them as often.
Right, and we could see they're really found throughout all of the state, and they're a lot smaller than their cousins, the brown squirrel and the gray squirrel. So we might not see them because A, they're out at night, they're tiny, and they're up in the trees. So
they are pretty small, but very cute.
Very cute. Now, moving on to a different type of winter survival in an animal that some folks may think isn't as cute, and that is the eastern gartersnake. Now, slithering slumber parties is what they do. The eastern gartersnakes often crowd together in the same winter den. Now, one crevice in Canada is known to contain tens of thousands of resting reptiles, all tangled together in a space about the size of your living room. Wow. So these garter snakes, which are usually just solitary, come together by the thousands in cases over the winter to nest together. I will just share with you, when I was a little kid, I was a Cub Scout, and we went on a field trip to a local nature center. This was in Northeast Ohio. They had a den of these things, and they were coming out. It was like walking through a field of huge spaghetti. They are just everywhere. You could lift by the handful and put them in buckets. It was the most creepy and amazing thing I've ever seen. So tell us more about how these reptiles survive winter.
It is quite the sight to see if you ever see a group of them huddled together for the winter. But if you're looking at that fact, I wanted to point out, you might see, oh, they're sleeping in a winter den. Okay, this is sounding like hibernation, but it's a trick again, because just like our torpor animals, there's a bit of a spin on things. When a cold-blooded animal, or what we call an ectothermic animal, survives winter in this way, we call it brumation. So it's the same principle as hibernation, but it just has a different word because they're ectothermic animals, or our cold-blooded animals.
Okay, we got a question too. One asking, do all types of snakes do this?
Not all snakes group together like that, but they all have that brumation because they're the cold-blooded animals.
Okay, so we have hibernation, torpor, and brumation.
Yes.
All right, well, I've learned a few things already today. So speaking of brumation, a couple other critters, reptiles, amphibians in this case, we have the American bullfrog who does this too. So to keep from turning into literally a frogsicle, the American bullfrogs, they burrow into the mud at the bottom of rivers or ponds during the winter. But being in the mud means that bullfrogs have some drawbacks. If the oxygen gets too low, the frogs will have to move, or they could croak. So how do they survive in the mud breathing?
So one of the differences in brumation and hibernation is that the brumation is not as deep of a sleep like we talked about. If an animal is in brumation or brumating, they can wake up periodically and move about. Especially for brumation, those animals do have to wake up and drink water. They can't survive that whole time without water. So that makes a little bit more sense when we consider our bullfrog, who might have to wake up and move about because he is running out of oxygen. Frogs, of course, they can kind of breathe through their skin. They can take in oxygen through their skin. But if there's not a lot of oxygen down in the mud, he'll have to get up and find a new place to spend the rest of the winter.
Right, right. And the bullfrogs, these are the largest frogs in Missouri, and it's the male that makes the deep croak we hear in the spring.
Yeah, so they are, of course, very well known for that really deep kind of juggerum call. But you won't hear that during the winter because that's usually reserved for the mating season, which peaks, in around July, starts in the spring and peaks in July. And I have my own little added strange fact about our bullfrog, that the female bullfrogs, they'll lay over 20,000 eggs per clutch. So that's my little
That's a lot of eggs.
strange fact.
It's a lot of eggs. So they dig down, or they kind of literally dig down in the mud. Another species of frog is the Boreal chorus frog. This is even more amazing. So talk about a frogsicle. During the winter, the Boreal chorus frogs survive by being frozen nearly solid for days on end. Now, if this isn't amazing enough, consider this. While frozen, their hearts quit beating. Their hearts just stop. How do they survive this? That's crazy.
So these guys are really cool, and if you haven't had the chance to see one in person, you're not alone because they're kind of hard to see. They're tiny, but I guarantee you've heard one before. If you've been outside in the spring, you've heard one of these guys. They have that call that kind of sounds like someone pulling their thumb across the teeth of a comb. It's kind of a higher pitched call. But what makes them so cool to survive the winter is that they have an increased level of glucose and sugar alcohol in their blood that kind of acts as an antifreeze. So it keeps their cells from freezing. And on top of that, they can kind of control where the ice grows in their body. So they have special proteins that function as kind of places for the ice to grow. It says, hey, grow the ice in this part of my body, not in the important cells that I need to continue to survive. So they can control where the ice grows so it doesn't hurt them in the long run.
So in this antifreeze that they create naturally kind of protects the inside of their cells so they don't freeze, and the areas outside of the cells can freeze, which they could freeze solid, and their hearts could stop beating, but then they start again naturally. Nature really is strange, and this is true. So, we've mentioned critters that go to sleep essentially in order to survive winter, but not all animals can do that. So we have another group of animals coming up that are active during the winter. And again, folks, if you have questions, share them through the chat box on the right side of your screen, and we'll get to what we can. So moving on, an iconic species, the red fox. Everybody knows it for its beautiful coat and its big fluffy tail. Well, before we get on to that, somebody wants to ask, what about lizards? Do they kind of do what frogs and snakes do over the winter to survive?
Yeah, so our lizards are one of those ectothermic animals, so what we call cold-blooded animal. So they're similar to how the snakes survive winter. They'll be in that brumation that kind of almost hibernation state, but they might wake up on a warm winter day and move around, but they will then sleep on those really coldest of winter days.
Okay. And again, we're talking about animals that don't sleep over the winter and have to be out and about. So this is a tall tail. A red fox's tail can make up almost 40% of its total length. So on chilly nights, they curl into donut-shaped balls and wrap their bushy tails around their bodies. And then to really stay extra cozy, they'll tuck their nose underneath their tail, because with the nose, the face, those are about the only parts of a fox that are exposed in the winter. So
Yeah.
Tell us more about these beautiful animals.
So the fox, which I agree is one of the prettiest animals, I think, is a good example of an animal that stays active during the winter, but has kind of some specialized things that help it survive those cold days. And one of those is just that really thick coat, right? You can see from looking at those pictures, like you could tell they just look thick and warm, and they do put on a winter coat that's a little bit heavier than their summer coat and a little bit longer to cover some, important body parts like their paws. The winter coat grows long enough to cover their paws, which is a vulnerable part of the body, like the nose, right? We know when we go outside, we put on gloves and we put on hats and things to protect parts of our body that have heat loss. Well, the red fox is doing that same thing, and that really bushy tail that you can see there in that picture is perfect for cuddling up. It's like he's carrying around his favorite blanket with him, or scarf.
Right.
And I like to think of it as a blanket because it just makes him seem a little cuter. And he could wrap up in that to stay warm whenever he needs to.
And other kind of familiar iconic pictures, foxes hunt primarily mice, small rodents. So in the winter, using those amazing ears, they could hear a mouse crawling under the snow, like a foot, 2 feet under the snow, and then they jump to catch it. So that's another reason. Well, that's how they find food in the winter, which is still out. So we have another question, folks. Somebody asked, how do caterpillars survive over the winter?
A lot of if caterpillars are going to be, or if I should say, if insects are going to be overwintering in the larva state, which is what a caterpillar is, it's the larva state of a butterfly. They a lot of times are burrowed down into the ground and under lots of leaf layers, leaf litter, and that kind of adds insulation like a blanket for them, which is one reason why we really always encourage you to leave leaves whenever possible. Once they fall in the fall, leave them there if you can, because a lot of insects use that leaf litter like a blanket to help keep them warm through the winter. They do kind of go dormant for the winter, so they're not necessarily under there crawling around, but they use that leaf litter like a blanket to keep them warm while they're dormant over the winter.
Okay, good question. Thank you. So the fox is a key predator, one of another iconic animal here in Missouri is the Bobwhite quail. So these amazing birds huddle up in the fall and winter. So northern bobwhites will snuggle together in a circle, and they put their tails in the inside touching and their beaks pointing outward. This arrangement really keeps them warm and also helps them watch for predators. That's a pretty cool survival strategy.
Yeah, so we see again the idea of kind of cuddling up with your friends to share body heat. In the fall, quail will group up in a covey, and that covey could be anywhere from 5 to 30 birds, and they use that to stay warm over the winter, sharing that body heat. But there are pros and cons to that tactic, not just with quail, but even with some of the other animals we've seen do that this morning. They have those extra eyes for predators, but they are a little bit more vulnerable for predators. They might spread disease when they're huddled up together like that. And we just have to think about food, right? It's hard enough to find food in winter, then trying to imagine feeding yourself and all your friends at the same time.
Right.
You could be limited by food there. So pros and cons of grouping up like that, like the quails do.
We have I think another bird coming up, but someone was asking, how do birds survive winter? So here's one example. You mentioned a lot of birds migrate, so they leave for warmer climates. And those that stay have these tactics, such as the bobwhite quail, the cluster, and we're going to talk about another key bird coming up. But basically, they tough it out or leave.
Pretty much. And like you said, a lot of those birds, a lot of the birds we see in the summer are migrating. So if you see them in the summer and you notice that you're not seeing them around in the winter, those are probably the birds that are migrating south. And like we mentioned, there are a lot of other. We could do a whole other PowerPoint on strange migrating facts because there's some really cool animals that migrate, but other birds are able to either use their feathers or use groups like tactics like grouping up like this to survive the winter.
Interesting. So this is a prey animal. So bobwhite, they have to kind of protect themselves and in that sense each other from predators. A big predator, which is actually a very small predator, is the least weasel, this tiny little killer. They are quick change artists. So in northern parts of their range, the least weasels, they turn their brown summer coats, they trade that in for a white winter fur. This helps these feisty little predators sneak through the snow and catch mice and other prey. So some animals, such as the least weasel, use camouflage.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a great example of kind of adapting to winter. Now in Missouri, we do only see these least weasels in the very kind of top of the state there, and we're kind of the southern part of their range. But they're a cool one to point out because they have such a drastic change for the winter months. You can see there the different colors. We have that kind of brown color in the summer, warm season, and they can change to pretty much all white there for the winter. And think about the difference that would make if you are standing out in the middle of a field, let's say a crop field. The crops are gone. Most of us probably know what that looks like. And you're a brown weasel on white snow. Well, you might as well have a big spotlight on you.
Right. Even though they're predators, they are also prey to other animals such as large raptors.
Oh, absolutely.
Owls, hawks, things like that.
Absolutely. So that ability to camouflage helps protect themselves from other predators, and like you mentioned, it helps them be a better predator, right? If you're trying to sneak up on a mouse, which is their favorite food, you want to blend in well so they don't see you coming.
Right. So these fierce little critters can change color over the winter months. Another animal that really doesn't have that luxury, that has to survive through the winter, is the Virginia possum. So they often have bad ear days. A Virginia possum's ears and tail are practically hairless, and this could cause a significant problem in the winter. So without fur to keep them warm, the tips of these body parts can freeze and fall off. So literally the tips of their ears and tail can freeze and fall off. That doesn't sound very pleasant.
Yeah, these guys have a bit of a rough go of it, but we kind of know what this feels like, right? I know you guys can't see me or see us at the moment, but if you remember from that picture earlier, it would be kind of like Joe going outside on a cold day. His head might get a little cold
Because it's all shaved. Whereas Sarah has a nice head of hair, so that'll stay warmer and less chance of your ears freezing and falling off.
Exactly. We know that. It makes sense, right?
And they can't wear caps.
Right. They don't have stocking caps or little tail warmers to use. But a lot of times it is, you can see kind of in those pictures there, those are possums who look like they might have some frostbite damage on their ears. It's usually, a small part of their ear, so it doesn't really affect their kind of daily activities.
Right.
And to be honest, the opossum has a pretty short lifespan. It's really only expected to live maybe 2 to 3 years in the wild. So if you lose part of your ear, you won't.
You're not going to be around.
Matter too much in the end.
Oh, someone wants to know. Good question. Does the coat of the weasel turn white, or do they shed the brown coat and grow a white one?
Yeah, so just like other mammals that we see who put on a winter coat, they're shedding old fur and growing new fur, and that's the same thing that happens with the weasel. They'll shed brown, and the white will grow back.
Okay, and then somebody wanted to clarify again how insects survive winter. So we said that basically if they are going to survive, a lot of insects die over the winter, but those that survive do so by going underground, under leaf litter, so they're cold, but they're not actually frozen solid, and they really go dormant. So there's a lot of insects who use a lot of different. All right, folks, sorry we had a little technical snafu there, but hopefully we're back on track and you could hear us and also see us.
And I think you were mentioning just we were
Insects.
clarifying the insects. A lot of insects do die for the winter, but if they survive, they're going to be burrowing underground. A lot of insects spend the winter underground, and they do enter kind of a hibernation state, a dormant state for the winter. But interestingly enough, there are also insects that migrate. So very cool. Again, insects could be a whole other
web
point,
right?
So.
And the monarch butterfly
Exactly
is that
good
iconic
example.
migrator is of an insect that they travel literally thousands of miles through the course of the fall and winter. Okay, so with that, and are weasels related to ferrets?
Yes, they're
Yes.
in the same
Musculid
family.
I think is it musculid? Weasels, ferrets, mink,
Yeah,
otter,
yes.
those types.
Yes,
I think the
those are-
largest is a wolverine, and one of the smallest is the least weasel.
Yeah, that least weasel is very small. It's kind of hard to
It's like 6
to
inches
show
long.
in the picture. Yeah, the weight range of that weasel can be from about 1 to 2 ounces. So it's pretty small.
Okay, and again, folks, thank you for sticking with us. We're having a little bit of a technical difficulty here. So we're getting back to our sound and view. We talked about some birds using different strategies to survive winter. And while some of them migrate, we often think ducks are a big migrator, but we have ducks that migrate into Missouri in the winter or through Missouri in the winter. The mallard is one of them. So as we see mallard ducks and other ducks kind of on a frozen or nearly frozen water, why doesn't a duck's foot freeze in icy water? Well, it comes down to plumbing. And as the warm blood flows down a duck's leg, it passes alongside cold blood that's returning from the foot. So this cools the blood down so it doesn't lose much heat, keeps it warm enough to avoid freezing. So they're using kind of that heat transference. Explain more to us about how that works.
So this is crazy. I love this fact. The mallard, which is one of our probably most recognizable ducks with that green head, especially that male, anyways, is really cool. It has a lot of ways to stay warm in its body. But its feet, now they do get cold, don't get me wrong, but they don't freeze thanks to kind of plumbing and physics, like you mentioned. So as the blood, we know that our heart pumps blood. A mallard has a heart just like we do that pumps blood, and it's located kind of in the center of the body, which is the warmest part of the body. And as it's pumping blood, it pumps blood away from the heart that moves down into the foot. And as that warm blood coming from the heart passes the cold blood coming back from the foot, they kind of equalize in temperature. So the blood going into the foot is cooled down a little bit, and the blood going back to the heart is warmed up a little bit. And that helps kind of decrease heat loss. We know that if there's a big difference in temperature, we're going to have a lot of heat loss. So that foot being a little bit closer to the temperature of the water helps it not lose so much heat.
Right, and as we could just tell from the pictures of them, their feet and maybe their beak, but their feet are really the only part of their body that's not covered in their feathers, which also act as warmth, help keep them warm, right?
Right. They have a couple other cool ways that they stay warm. Those feathers are really interesting, and we could get into more detail about that. But if you're interested, you should do a deep dive.
They're waterproof,
yeah.
for one, so water makes you colder. If you get exposed, like when we've been outside shoveling snow or something, if we're sweating or our clothes get wet, that helps make us get colder faster. Well, by having their waterproof feathers, that kind of helps them stay warm. So another cool bird that survives the winter and has a pretty cool trick up its wing is the great horned owl. They don't really give a hoot about cold weather. So these hardy hunters, they start nesting in January. That is a lot earlier than really any other bird in Missouri. And their eggs can survive temperatures of 10 degrees below zero. Now we know birds sit on their eggs to keep them warm, to keep them from getting cold, but these eggs could survive 10 degrees below zero. That's amazing.
Yeah, so the great horned owl is a really good example of an animal that kind of takes advantage of this cold winter and turns it around and turns it into a positive. So the great horned owl chicks take a while to develop, even after they hatch from the egg. They take several months to develop. So the great horned owl actually lays their eggs very early in the year so that they can give their babies, their chicks, the best chance at surviving the next winter on their own. If they had their eggs in, May or June, like some other birds, well, their babies wouldn't be ready to survive the next winter on their own. So they're kind of taking advantage of that early opportunity so that their babies are successful the rest of the year.
Okay, so we know their eggs could survive like 10 degrees below zero, but the owl still has to sit on the eggs and incubate the eggs. And I would imagine during the winter, they have to do that a lot more.
Yes, absolutely. And because they're laying those eggs so early in the year, that mama owl has to basically sit on those eggs constantly. So much so that she can't even leave to eat. And so we see the father owl or the male owl bringing food to the mom. And even after the eggs have hatched, he'll continue to bring food to the nest while she keeps them warm.
Pretty fascinating. And we go from, I believe, Missouri's largest owl to quite a small little critter coming up next. And folks, you were asking about how insects survive winter. Well, this particular insect has a very unique way of surviving. This is a mourning cloak butterfly, and they are among the first butterflies to really flutter by in the spring. Now, they suck sap, which flows from trees, and it flows really best when it's warm during the day and freezes at night. Think about maple trees and sugar maples and tapping maple trees to make maple sugar. We also do that in late winter when we have warm days and cold nights to get that sap flowing. So it's not uncommon to see mourning cloak butterflies flying around when there's still snow on the ground. How do they do this?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, continuing on our insect investigation here, this is a type of butterfly that overwinters as an adult, which is a little bit unusual.
Yeah, where do they, they can't check into a hotel.
No, they usually kind of hide out between, that would be very funny. They usually hide out kind of under loose bark on a tree or other kind of cavities in the tree. And they do essentially, hibernate. They enter that dormant state. And they'll basically be dormant for the winter. But any kind of sign of warmer weather in that early spring, they will wake up and start to eat that sap.
That's amazing. And also, they're one of the longest lived butterflies, often surviving for about 10 months. So you mentioned they overwinter, and then when spring comes, they suck the sap, and then they mate and die, lay the new generation, and then they die. So somebody also asked, how do they get the sap from the trees?
Yeah, good question. Because if you think about a butterfly, they do not have those piercing or chewing mouth parts of some other insects.
They have, it's a,
Yes.
is it? It's that long curly,
like a straw,
yeah,
kind of. And so they will actually find sap that's already oozing from trees. And that might be from damage that occurred over the winter. So if you think about a big ice storm, it usually breaks off some limbs and branches. That creates wounds that sap will seep out of. But also you might get some help from some friends. We have a sap sucker type of bird. It's called a sap sucker here in Missouri, and it will, it's a type of woodpecker, so it will drill into the tree looking for that sap and creates holes that sap will ooze out of. And those are very good places to look for those mourning cloaks.
So, and even after the sapsucker moves on, that sap still keeps running, which is that really buffet for the mourning cloak butterfly.
Absolutely.
So a butterfly that survives the winter and is flitting about when there's snow on the ground. That's pretty amazing. And our last strange but true item on this list, we jump over to a plant, and that is the Ozark witch hazel. Now this zooms to bloom first in Missouri most years. So in mid-January, a lot of times when there's still snow on the ground, this shrubby tree will unfurl these frilly, flashy flowers to lure any flies or moths or butterflies or bees that might be out buzzing because it's a warm day. So tell us about this cool.
Yeah, so I definitely wanted to include a plant here to end with because I wanted to make the point that, you know, winter is hard for everyone, not just animals. It's hard for our plants too. But this is a really cool one that, again, kind of uses, takes advantage of the cold weather and makes the best of it to kind of outcompete for pollinators. So those pollinators that are out and about, like flies and moths that are a little bit more active in the winter, that early spring weather, it can be one of the primary food sources for those pollinators, which of course is beneficial to it.
Right, and we see they're found all throughout the state. And Sarah, as we kind of, you opened with explaining the core of a food chain, we're kind of closing with that, this being a plant. So you were telling us again, plants are the foundation of a food chain. We ended with that, and they also begin with that.
Absolutely, yeah, and you know, I'm getting so many other ideas of good PowerPoints because we could do a whole other presentation on how different plants survive the winter. But you know, it's just to reiterate that, you know, winter's hard for everybody.
And that's kind of our short list of winter wildlife survivors from our Strange But True book. Again, while our Strange But True was adapted from our amazing kids magazine called Xplor. So if you're interested in this, we have that available. Again, makes a great holiday gift or a stocking stuffer for $8.95. You can buy them online through our nature shop at mdcnatureshop.com, or you could visit an MDC Nature Center around the state. They're also available there. And if you'd like more information on these and other native plants and animals, we encourage you to visit our online field guide. Just go to our website, mdc.mo.gov, and you could just simply search field guide or the specific animal that you're wanting more information on. And again, Sarah, I think we have another question coming in.
I have so it looks like someone asked a question about otters.
Yeah.
They are one of a really good example. And you know what? They're actually, I know because I can picture it in my mind right now, there are facts about otters in the Strange But True book. And we didn't put them in today because we, you know, could only do so many. But otters are a really awesome animal that really has fun in the winter, right? And I usually, if I do a presentation, I always like to, I talk about, well, you could sleep or you could leave or you could adapt or you could just have fun. And
they're like the kids playing outside in the winter.
Use the otter for that. They have that really thick fur, that waterproofing that helps them stay warm, and they just have fun.
They love the snow, as a matter of fact. And again, otters live alongside our rivers, our streams, our lakes, our ponds, a lot of waterways that don't freeze solid. So they spend time frolicking in the water. They're primarily fish eaters, which again, fish don't sleep during the winter. They just maybe go deeper into the water. So otters have plenty of food. As you said, they have that waterproof coat and some thick fur and some fat. So they just frolic all winter and have fun. So thanks for that question. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today and for your questions. Sarah, thank you for joining us and bringing your expertise and excitement to our Wild Webcast. And this pretty much concludes our Winter Wildlife Survival Webcast. So again, you can get more from our Strange But True book. And if you want more Wild Webcasts, including this one, you could visit us online. Again, just go to mdc.mo.gov and simply search Wild Webcasts. This one will be posted over the next several days, so if you want to share it with others, we encourage you to do that. Anything else, Sarah?
No, I encourage you to, however you decide to spend winter, whether it's cuddled up inside with a good book or maybe headed south for the winter, or if you're like me and you like to play in the snow, however you choose, I hope you enjoy it.
Right, and get outside and discover nature. So thanks, folks. Stay warm, stay well, and have a great day.